Hello, Build Stuff. Has this been an awesome first day? Yes. Yes. Let me try that again. Has this been an awesome first day? Yes. All right. It is my great privilege to be here to help close this out. But I know you're not here for me. You're hoping for beer later, right? My name is Linda Rising. I came all the way to Lithuania. This is my very first visit here. I normally live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is Music City, USA. So now you are all invited. Come on to my house next week, and we will go honky-tonkin' down Broadway, and we will hear lots of good music. We're going to talk about some difficult things, because I do live in the United States of America. And last November, I don't know if you noticed, we had an election. I woke up that next morning very disturbed to find out that we had a new president who was not only ignorant, but also a misogynist, racist bigot. I thought my protest days were over, because I was out in the streets carrying signs in the 1970s protesting the Vietnam War. Well, now I'm out on the streets with signs protesting something else. And as I said, I live in Tennessee. That is what we call a red state. That means most of the people who are my friends and neighbors voted for Donald Trump. Nashville is what's called a little blue dot. It's a little tiny blue space in the middle of a red state. So that means that I started looking at all my friends and neighbors. I looked at people who had been my friends before the election, and I began to wonder, were they Trump supporters? I not only looked at people in my neighborhood, but people in the grocery store, people on the street. In fact, after a while, I began to wonder. I felt like a character in the Twilight Zone. I don't know if you've seen this episode. It's available on YouTube. No, not now. Don't look now. It's about a neighborhood where people began to turn on each other. People began to suspect their friends and neighbors. And finally, at the end of the episode, one of them actually pulls out a gun and kills one of his neighbors. Does that sound like the United States today? So I began to wonder, was I really living in the Twilight Zone? What could I do about it? So I began looking at some new research on how we talk to people we don't agree with. And I thought it fit pretty well, not only with the current political situation, but also with a lot of problems I see in the world today, including some in software development. I don't know if you have ever had the experience of talking to somebody you don't agree with in your own organization. Has that ever happened to you? Anybody? Oh, okay. So maybe this is appropriate. I want to be clear. I know that there are people for whom the research will not apply. I know there are people whose views are so extreme that we have no hope of having any kind of civil discourse, rational discussion. I'm not talking about those people. Of course, Donald Trump has not invited me in for a conversation. I don't know what I would do if he did. We'll have to think about that. I'm talking about ordinary people. I'm talking about you and me. I'm talking about the people that you run into in your neighborhood, your friends, your colleagues. There are things in the United States that are so bad that people have stopped talking to one another. Friends, family members. The country is divided as never before. Some people have said that we are ready to have another civil war, that the division is greater than in the 1800s when we did have civil war, because at that time there were moderates, there were people in the middle, there were people who were collaborators in our government, there were people who were intelligent. Not so today. Everyone is taking sides. It's something new, something definitely new for the United States. So this is the problem, isn't it? When we don't agree with somebody, this is what we do. We immediately go into, this is conflict, isn't it? Back and forth. And we pretend that we're listening, but we're really not. While we're getting ready to speak, we're not listening at all. We're getting ready. We're getting ready to make our point. Metaphorically, physically, literally, our point. And the goal of this stance is to, at some point, say, "Ha! I win. I know something you don't. I can make you look stupid." That's the goal. How many of you have ever done that? Had a discussion like that? Oh, come on. Even in Lithuania, yeah, you do that. Yes, absolutely. And when you've made your point, when you've done it, when you've said, "Ha!" when you've killed your opponent, has it ever happened that your opponent got up off the ground and said, "Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you for making me feel so stupid. Oh, thank you for showing me that you are so much smarter than I am. Oh, thank you for showing me the error of my ways." Has that ever happened? Oh, it has? Well, I would be happy to sit down and let you come up here and give this talk. I have never experienced that, and I know I've been doing this longer than you have. In fact, I think looking around the room, I've been doing everything longer than you have. So if you read my bio, you probably were astounded to see that I have a PhD in computer science. And now that you've looked at me in person, you say, "How is that possible? This woman must be at least 125. They probably didn't even have computers when she was going to school." And you would be right. We were sitting on the ground, beating out messages with rocks, building a little fire in the middle and smoking and saying, "Yeah, man." Wasn't until much later in my life that I went back to school and I got that PhD, and my goal at the time was finish by 50. So maybe some of you came in here today and you said, "Oh, I don't know, I have some ideas." But I have a lot of other things going on in my life. And, well, I am getting older. I'm now 30. How many of you were thinking that? Oh, I'm so old. I'm so old. So I did make that goal. I did finish by 50. I finished my dissertation 1 month before my 50th birthday. Usually I get applause at that point. Thank you. But here's the astounding thing. That was 25 years ago. So back to our subject, we think that when we're having that duel with somebody, that if we could only convince them by showing them some data, the facts. Isn't it all about data? I mean, we're technical people here. We love data. We love facts. Surely when people come up against facts, that's convincing, isn't it? Just outlining the data, the information, the evidence, the science, the studies, surely that will always be convincing. And when it isn't, then we look at that other person in the room and we think, well, it must be a problem with them. Maybe they're not as smart as I thought. Maybe they're stupid. If they can't follow this argument, it can't be me. It can't be my information. It must be them. What's wrong with those people? What's wrong with people who don't listen to logic? Who don't listen to reason? And the answer is, unfortunately, if you look at our evolutionary history, reason never played a survival part of it. We're not hardwired to listen to rational argument. Yes, we do have reason, that part of our brain that developed very late. Yes, we can use that. But when researchers look at how we make decisions, and they can do that these days, they can put somebody in an fMRI machine and ask them a question, and they can see what parts of their brain light up, and they can see that reason doesn't come online until after the decision has been made. The decision, in other words, is made by a different part of your brain. It's called System 1. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then our logic, our reason, justifies. It comes online after the decision has been made and tells us why we made that decision. It's like a press secretary explaining to you and to others why we made it, but it had nothing to do with the decision itself. In other words, and this is really bad news at a technical conference, you're not rational decision makers. So when you get out there among those vendors who are giving away things, watch out. How many of you have read the book, Thinking Fast and Slow? Oh, awesome. Okay, hire these people. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It was written by someone who got a Nobel Prize in economics. And the crux of the tale is exactly what I have just told you, so I guess I could save you the effort of reading the book. You are not a rational decision maker. It's full of research. It's full of all the research of Daniel Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky, and they show over and over and over how irrational we are. If you don't have the stamina for Kahneman, you could probably find anything by Dan Ariely. He's also on TED. given lots of interesting talks about behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is based on the premise that man, that is, all of us, are not rational decision makers. This is opposed to classical economics, which begins with the assumption that man, that is, all of us, are rational decision makers, and builds on that simple but incorrect assumption a whole host of models that don't work. Why doesn't classical economics die? Why is it still around, probably even in Lithuania? And the answer is the classical economists are not rational either. So they can look at all the evidence. They can look at all the science, from Kahneman, Tversky, Dan Ariely, and say, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Max Planck said, science does not proceed in a smooth curve. It goes in fits and starts and jumps. And what we have to wait for is for those scientists who believed in the old way to die. So that's what we're waiting for, mostly in the University of Chicago. When the classical economists die, then we'll move to behavioral economics. So don't hold your breath. One of the ways in which we are not rational is something called the confirmation bias. And I think if we took a little poll right now, we could probably see it, because many of you don't believe what I've been saying. And I won't ask you to raise your hands. But even though I have said there's science behind this, there's evidence to show you are not rational, you don't believe it. The confirmation bias says once we believe something, we will only listen to those things that support our belief. So I'm having a political discussion with my neighbor who's a Donald Trump supporter. It doesn't matter what facts I bring to the discussion, because he or she is not going to be convinced. They're going to either ignore it or pretend that I don't know anything at all. And you have likely done that, haven't you? In a discussion with somebody you don't agree with, even if they put facts on the table, have you found it convenient to ignore them when it didn't suit you? We all do that. It's one of the worst mental tricks we have. It allows us to ignore new science, new information, and stay with the view that we have of anything. Politics, global warming, programming languages, development environments, doesn't matter. Once we have bought into something, we hang on to it, and we don't like to give it up. And in fact, if you have to listen to somebody who has data or has information, and you have to work really hard to ignore it, then that energy, that effort will make you more convinced than you were before the discussion started, and that's called the backfire effect. Not only will you not convince somebody by giving them data and evidence, you will make them more firmly convinced that they were right to begin with. So give it up. Data is not convincing, and that's true for all of us. We also are very uncomfortable when somebody tells us something that doesn't agree with what we have. We have physical discomfort. We can't hold two opposing ideas in our heads at the same time. Cognitive dissonance is what it's called. And we will do anything. We will go to great lengths to avoid having to do that, to have to listen to somebody who has pretty strong evidence with a position that doesn't agree with us. So no wonder we're having conflict. Because most of us are going into those conflict situations, and except for this one individual here, we're not having a lot of success. Because people are biased, and that's all of us. We don't listen to evidence. Now, I'm not saying you should believe everything you run across, because let's use the Greek interpretation of the word skeptic. It's always good to have people who are skeptical. It's always good to have people who say, wait a minute, I'm not sure should we all go agile? So the CEO says, yeah, we're going to be agile by next June. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Let's ask some good questions about that. A skeptic is a valuable member of any team. Every meeting, every decision should involve somebody who plays the role of skeptic. That's different from the word, I don't know, this is getting a little English, cynic. Somebody who's just negative for the sake of being negative, doesn't add value, resists all new ideas without asking good questions. Skeptics, yes. Skeptics are valuable. Skeptics ask hard questions, but they have good hearts. You need them. If you're lucky enough to have one on your team, go give them a hug for me. So I know about organizational change. I have written 2 books about it with my good friend Mary Lynn Manns. The first one took 10 years. It's a book of patterns for introducing new ideas. And I started out that book as a designer. I called myself a technical person. And over the 10 years, I changed. As I started looking at all kinds of evidence, the evidence actually convinced me that if you're going to change an organization, if you're going to change people, you better look at something called social psychology. That is the psychology of groups. I knew what psychology was, but I didn't know there was a separate discipline, social psychology, how groups behave. Now, I made that discovery pretty late in life. And I hope that for those of you who are not sitting there wallowing in confirmation bias, that if you are a very technical person and you don't know what social psychology is, that now that you're as old as 30, you wake up and say, I don't want to be someone who makes the same mistakes Linda did. I better learn about that. I better pay attention. The technical stuff, and I know you're not going to agree with this either, the technical stuff is easy. The people stuff, wow, that's hard, really hard. You better learn about social psychology, you better learn about influence, and luckily enough, I'm having a workshop on Saturday, so if you haven't signed up, this is your chance to do that. And then finally, evolutionary biology. We are the way we are because we evolved to have certain characteristics. And that means there's nothing we can do about it. All those biases, those are hardwired. We're stuck with them. And then another 10 years later, and it just came out in Chinese. I don't know whether it's out in Lithuanian, but Chinese, yes. More fearless change with lots of other patterns for organizational change. So the one that I'm going to talk about today is called Fearless. And it says, basically, when you find somebody who doesn't agree with you, the best thing you can do is listen. None of this, no arguing, no bringing forth of facts, no bringing forth of evidence, no bringing forth of science. It's just listen. I don't know if you read this book either. Stephen Covey wrote a wonderful book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How many have read it? Wonderful. If you have read it, read it again. If you haven't read it, the first person who asks a question online will get a copy. He said, your listening should be done with intent to understand, not to be understood. So that's the pattern, fear less. And I know it well. It's not always easy when you disagree violently, to just listen. I wrote the pattern. I should know it. Of course, now remember, you need that argument, that nice rational set of logic, because you want to hand it over to the person once they've been convinced of your idea. You want to give them a set of reasons for why they believe it. You need to hand them a rationale. You need to hand them an explanation. So when some people say, well, why did you change your mind? You can give them that nice set of reasons. Not because the reasons are convincing, but they'll need it for themselves and for others. So you make that available, realizing that that's not why they're going to listen to you or change their minds. The other pattern we need is personal touch, and that is everybody's different, and everybody is asking the same question, whether it's a political issue or a new programming language or a development environment or going agile. They're all asking the same question, which is, why should I do that? What's in it for me? And you, if you're trying to convince, you should be prepared to answer that. As Jeff Patton says, you have to make it real. A genuine user need. Data is not the same thing as empathy, and that's true for your users or your customers or the colleague at work who doesn't agree with you. If you don't understand where they're coming from, you're never going to convince them. So I'm guessing that many of you have seen this sort of normal curve. When a new idea comes into any environment, whether it's technical or not, this is how we line up. And again, this is hardwired. So there are going to be a very few people who say, oh, something new. That's wonderful. I love new things. They're called the innovators. And that's all you have to do is say, I went to this really cool conference called Bill Stuff, and I heard this guy give a talk about some tool or methodology, and I think maybe we should try it. It's the latest, it's the greatest, it's the coolest. And the innovators will say, yeah, let me add it. But not very many, 2.5% in a normal population. Now, there's a group right below them, the early adopters, who are open, but they don't jump up and down and get excited. They say, yeah, that sounds like it might work, but can you tell me more? Maybe I could read a paper about it, or did they videotape that talk so I could hear it too? But look, only 13.5%. And except for those two groups, everybody else in your organization is going to be resistant. And that is just the way it is. Should I say that again? This is hardwired. So don't think that you're going to come in with some new idea, whether it's something you heard at Build Stuff and you got all excited about it, and you're going to go back home and you're going to immediately be able to convince with some logical argument or maybe a nice little demo or some PowerPoint that we should all do this, and everybody's going to say, yeah. Sorry. In fact, for these later groups, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. Now, I just said these are hardwired. Why would that be? Think about what life was like 10,000 years ago as we're sitting under the trees in the savannah in Africa, and all of a sudden we come across, as a little group of maybe 50 or 60 people, we come across some new fruit. Would it be a good idea if we all said, oh, yippee, new food, let's all try it? What do you think? Not a good idea. It would be better if instead we pick this guy and a couple other people and we say, hey, you go try that new fruit, and then we'll watch you, and we will see in a day or two how you're doing. And if it looks okay, well, maybe some of us might try it, and then later on others, but some of us will never try it. Some of us will be holdouts to the end, like the people who are rolling across the back of the stage right now. They're called the laggards. They will never try it. Never. You're stuck with that, just like you're stuck with this. It looks like that. It's a normal curve. We line up along that normal curve. And that's the way things are. This is from the work of E.M. Rogers. He wrote a book called The Fusion of Innovations. And so, since that's the way it is, don't delude yourself that you're going to be able to convince everybody of anything. It's a myth that you can transform an organization. So I do a lot of agile transformation, and I hear every now and then, well, our agile transformation failed. And I say, nonsense. You probably thought you could come in and force feed it to a bunch of people and you were going to get it all done in 6 months. That's not going to happen. Sorry. Thank you. There's nothing you can do about it, so you might as well work with it. Focus on the innovators. Focus on the early adopters. The early majority will come on board later if they see things are working. They're smart people. They care. Some of them will never come on board. That's okay, too, if they add value. You should be able to use them whether they want a pair program or not. And yes, they're typically older. Yes, they've typically been through a lot of change. Yes, that also means they're more experienced. And someday, maybe you will be 75 and you will be a little resistant as well, if you're so lucky. This is called the industrial age mindset. The idea that we could all be the same. Because we are not. Some of you are here from organizations where others said, no, I don't want to go to that conference. You go. So you're likely the innovators or the early adopters, and that's great. And you should be looking at new ideas, and you should be thinking about new things. And if your organization is a smart organization, they will let you run ahead. You try the new fruit. You be the ones to experiment. And now you can let the rest of the organization know. And some of those in the organization are going to hang back. And they're going to be the experts on what you already know and what you already have. That's okay, too. Take advantage of that. People are all different. And they bring different capabilities and different points of view to the table. Embrace that. It's industrial age thinking that believes we can all line up and turn the crank at the same time, in the same way, to produce the most efficient product. That is nonsense. Even you, the innovators and the early adopters, are not all the same. There's a normal curve in here. Some of you are more adventuresome than others. Some of you will be, let's hang back and wait. So any group of people will fall onto this normal distribution, and we're hardwired to do that. So don't get upset about it or feel like this is bad news. This is how we are as human beings. We are hardwired to behave this way. So the last pattern is sort of an epitome of the other two, and it just says, listen. Listen to what the other person has to say. There's lots of research around the power of listening. And by that, I mean, don't talk. How many of you are married or have partners at home? Okay, so you know what I'm saying here. You're going to go home tonight and you are going to try this out. Okay? It says, listen. It says, listen. It doesn't say, oh, but you always, wait, how many of you have ever said that to your partner, spouse at home? You always, no. Oh, she's the one who says, you always. So try this. Just listen. And it's got to be sincere because the other person knows whether you're really listening or not. We know. We all know that. If somebody is paying attention to what we have to say, that is the greatest gift anybody can give anybody, is to really listen. So I started looking at some research, and I'll recommend these two books, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and he's also on TED, and The Moral Tribes by Joshua Green. He's not as out there, he's more of an academic, and these two books changed my life. Because these are the people who study conflict and how we think about our politics, our beliefs. This is actual science. So the science of morality, what we value. And what they found is something kind of interesting. They say we can identify these, well, they call them moral tribes. Well, certainly in the United States, I know we have moral tribes. I don't know about Lithuania. What do you think? Are there moral tribes in Lithuania? I think there are moral tribes everywhere. There are certainly moral tribes in the Agile community. In the beginning, maybe more moral tribes than there are now, but there were certainly in the beginning lots of debate, lots of conflict. Certainly have always had moral tribes in project development. Developers against testers. Developers against the business side. Developers against customers. Developers against users. Oh, yeah. And what do I mean by morals? These are the things where you think this is right. This is what you care about. These are your values. So the research around values said, around the world we can identify those who are kind of left-leaning. They tend to hold on to two values more strongly than any other possible value: care and also fairness. Now, I've only been at this conference one day, but it's a left-leaning conference. Do you know that? What's your charity, your project that you're supporting? It's got to do with children, doesn't it? And providing computers, a chance for those children. That's care and fairness. Those children might not have computers were it not for what you are doing. That's a fairness issue. You want to take care of the children in Lithuania? That's care. I've not heard anybody talk about any of the values on the right. They have to do with patriotism, loyalty to the tribe, authority. Who's in charge here? We want to pay attention to the president if it's the country, to the leader if it's a team. Loyalty. And then finally, what is sacred? What are the sacredness, the purity issues? I've not heard any of that. Care and fairness is in charge here. And in fact, since I go to a lot of conferences, they are almost all left-leaning conferences. That means you're not hearing from the other side. Just throw that out. So if you're going to talk to somebody who has a different set of values, that means you have to use their values in your discussion, not your values, their values. So if you're going to influence them at all, you have to talk about what they want to talk about. We can't talk about care and fairness if we are left-leaning and we're talking to somebody on the right. We have to talk about the values they think are important: authority, sacredness, patriotism. We know that if you have discussions with people that you don't agree with, it's very uncomfortable. In fact, you can measure the discomfort. And you can show that it is very stressful to talk to somebody with whom you do not share the same values. We know that you can measure the effect of that on your respiratory system and your blood pressure. But that is not as stressful as if you don't talk to people who don't agree with you. And if instead you ignore those differences, and that is exactly what's happening in the United States today, is nobody is talking to anybody who's not in their moral tribe. And that kind of simmering stress that's been going on now for over a year, that kind of stress also has a measurable impact on health, physical and mental, and it's much worse. And out of that comes, since we have social media, thank you very much, technical people. Since we have social media, and people can hide behind anonymous IDs, what we have are people who can say any horrible thing. So the stress of living in that environment where we have no face-to-face communication with people we don't like or don't agree with, and we have this enormous impact of social media, the stress on all of us is much worse than if we just had that difficult conversation in the first place. So here's an example. These are from the experiments that Haidt and his colleagues did. Let's suppose we want to have an argument about military spending. I don't know whether you do that in Lithuania or not. We certainly do that in the United States. Should we increase military spending? Well, there are two ways we could do the argument, right? We could do the right-flavored one. We could do the left-flavored one. And they would be very different. So the one flavored for the people on the right would say, we should take pride in our military. There's the loyalty value. It unifies us both at home and abroad. There's the patriotism, authority, loyalty. And it defends us from evil aggression. So there's sanctity, purity. That's a right-flavored argument for military spending. Let's look at one from the other side. In the military, the poor and disadvantaged can have equal opportunity. There's fairness. They have a chance to earn a decent living and a way out of the challenges of poverty and inequality. That's all true. It's a very different way of looking at the military as a way to help the disadvantaged. It's a left-flavored or a left-leaning argument. They're both trying to make the same point, that we should have increased spending in the military, but the argument is framed so differently. So in experiments, what we know is that if you take people who are normally on the left and people who are normally on the right, and you explain that there are these different ways of framing arguments, and that if you want to talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you, you should try to frame it in terms of their values, not in terms of your own values. And what we know is that even when there's money on the table, when people in the experiment are being paid to make an argument, what we see is they cannot do it. They cannot take on, even for the sake of an argument. They cannot take on the other side's values. It's as though we not only want to win the argument by making points, we want to win the argument by having the other side come over to our side and adopt our values. And that is not going to happen. There seem to be even genetic reasons why you have the values you do. You're born to it. Yes, you can change, but generally not. So we don't want to hope that everybody is someday going to all line up from the same set of values. It's just not going to happen here or anywhere else. So that even when there are incentives, we can't do it. It's very difficult. So here's a conversation you might have with someone who said, you know, I don't think that the Boy Scouts should allow gay people in to be scout leaders. You know, for thousands of years we had One man, one woman. I don't know if this is an issue in Lithuania or not, gay marriage. I don't want those people hanging around young children as role models. And the response from somebody on the left is typically, what are you talking about? One man, one woman, well, that's pretty new. Don't you know anything about what went on in the Bible? Look at those dudes back then. They had tons of wives. It's like you guys are ignoring the truth just to fight gay rights. That's what we would normally do. How better to say, you know, I think you're right. This is important. This long-standing relationship, one man, one woman, I totally respect how you feel about that. I think my main reason for allowing gays into the Boy Scouts is I have gay friends, and they know that the Boy Scouts had a powerful influence on them, and they just want to share that. They want to be able to pass that on. They want to be able to pay back, in a sense, everything that they got from the Boy Scouts. Very different argument. It's called walking in the other person's shoes. So hard to do. So I was going to try this out. I'm surrounded by Trump supporters, so I thought, I can do this. I can try out these moral value things. So I work out every day when I'm home, and there's a guy there who wears a big Make America Great Trump t-shirt while we're being visited again by the rolling carts. And I thought, I'm going to practice this. So I engaged him in conversation, and I tried to frame things using those moral values. I wasn't very successful. Usually what I did is mostly just listen. I mean, I know that pattern pretty well, so I didn't feel like I was very successful. And then one day he brought in a friend. I thought, oh no, I'm not doing a good job with one person. I don't know how I'm going to face two Trump supporters with their wearing their t-shirts and their hats that say Make America Great. So he introduced me to his friend, and he said, well, I want you to meet Linda. She's not a Trump supporter, but she's okay because she listens. So it made me realize I had it all wrong. I had it all wrong. I was trying to do this with those moral attributes. I was trying to do this, and I wasn't very successful, so my fallback position was just to listen, and I wound up just listening. And that's really what is more important. That's really what it's all about. It's not about arguing using any set of values. I was still trying to win. I was still trying to fight the duel. I was still trying to make my points. I was still hoping that at some point I could say, ha! And it wasn't going to happen. It was a powerful learning lesson for me that it all comes back to this. That's the most powerful thing we can do in spite of all the research about moral attributes and trying to use arguments from the other side, which is a good bit of information, and I hope you learn from that experience, but this is it. It's about listening. There's plenty of research that shows that when you really listen, people know that, and they feel you care. So here's the goal. If you go into a conflict situation and your goal is to win, it's not going to happen. If you go into a conflict situation with the idea that maybe you might learn something, and that maybe you might hear something that would change you, that maybe you might learn something that might improve your view on the subject, then that's a worthy goal. I have a friend who does international negotiations, and he said, you know, you don't usually have trouble getting countries to sit down at a negotiation table. He said they all want to come in because they all want to explain to the other side how they feel. And they all think that the other side is going to listen to them. So that's why they show up. He said, but I have been doing negotiations for over 40 years, and I have never heard anybody say, yes, I want to negotiate because I might be wrong. I want to come to the table because I want to learn. I want to sit down and listen to what the other side has to say. I hope that maybe, if I am open enough, that maybe we can work things out. He said, I've never, ever heard anybody say that. No wonder we're still struggling. The final question you always want to ask in any discussion is there some piece of information I could give that would change your mind? So I saw that question and I asked it of myself. I said, is there anything anybody could tell me about Donald Trump that would make me support him? No. So since I say that, that means I am biased. That means I'm not willing to listen. That means I'm not open even to rational argument. Even if somebody gave me evidence, I would not change my mind. So that's a question we always want to ask other people. I'm going to leave you with that to ask yourself. If that's how you're coming into the discussion saying there is nothing anybody could say that would convince me, then there's no reason to have the discussion because you're not going to be open. You're biased. And once you're biased, we know confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance, and the backfire effect among a whole host of other biases are working as hard as they can so that you will not listen to what others have to say. You're dead. You're doomed. That's a question for yourself. So I hope that maybe in your difficult conversations, yeah, that moral attribution stuff is really interesting, I think, and there's science behind it. I think the deeper lesson for all of us is you have to pay attention. You have to really listen. You have to care. So I'm hoping in Lithuania will be better because of what happened today. And I thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Did we have a question?
Yes.
All right.
Linda, you talk about learning from listening to your, I get the book.
You do.
Oh.
Okay.
So even though you have the confirmation bias, did you learn anything anyway? Was there anything where they actually managed to appeal to something inside you where you could feel shit?
You mean from the Trump supporters I talked to? Yes, absolutely, because I was willing to listen. And they both said the same thing, which was, we didn't think he would win. Which is an interesting comment, because once you have voted for somebody, it's really hard to say, oh, I now don't support that person. In fact, all the evidence, once you've actually cast your ballot, you believe more firmly. So here are two people who voted for him who say, we didn't think he would win. So that indicates a slight reluctance. They didn't say it, but they were ready to say, I wish I hadn't. And I think maybe that might be careful. If we would let that out, if we would be more open to that, if we wouldn't denigrate people on the other side, if we wouldn't think they were all stupid, if we wouldn't treat them as though we thought they were all totally inept, that maybe that might come out, that they didn't think he would win, and they're sorry they voted for him. I think that's also true for Brexit. which might have been engineered by the same group. Thank you very much, technical people. Yeah, so the book is yours. Okay, thank you. I know it's time for beer. Go for it.